Does anyone out there know what a Zelph is? Well, we'll be talking about that next on Polygamy. What love is this? She was born into polygamy. Her family followed the teachings of Joseph Smith. All of them, including plural marriage, especially plural marriage. Like many young girls, she had been promised to a man who was her father's age. But she fled. She ran away. She preferred an eternity of outer darkness to a life of polygamy. She chose hell over religious enslavement. That girl was me. After I fled, I thought I was free, but I realized I wasn't free. I was lost, alone, desolate. No home, no hope, no life. Then Jesus Christ found me and rescued me, and He loved me. In His love, I found real freedom, a real home, a real life. And Jesus offers you the very same thing. He is a shield to all who will take refuge in Him. He has been a refuge for me, and He can be for you too. Knowing the surpassing love of Jesus Christ today, this is why I can look back and ask, polygamy, what love is this? Welcome to our show tonight. This is Polygamy, What Love Is This? And I am your host, Doris Hanson, and we're grateful that you have chosen to spend an hour of your time with us this evening. Before we get started, I'd like to remind all of our viewers again that everyone who is participating in the show and the production and the broadcast of this program are all volunteers. None of us get paid a dime or a dollar for any of the work that we do, and we are encouraged every week when we hear from some of our viewers how they have been helped by the program to find truth through some of the things that we present. And we thank everyone who donates prayer time for our efforts, and if God is nudging you to help with our broadcast expenses, you can go on our website, whatloveisthis.tv, and you can click on the button, keep us on the air with a donation. And of course, all funds that are donated in this way will go directly to broadcasting the show. And we wanted to thank everyone who does help us as we bring biblical truths to this culture. Our guest co-host, former Mormon Bishop Earl Erskine, is again here tonight. Thanks again, Doris, for coming back.
Appreciate you having me.
Hope you're not a brute for punishment here, like we said. But anyway, it's nice to have you back. And since we've invited you to share as a co-host, we've had some remarks. Most of the remarks have been from either Mormons or ex-Mormons, and they say they can't respect you, not necessarily because you left the church, but because you left the church and then you're starting to yap about it.
Speak out.
And so in their eyes, they think it's wrong for you to come public with the reasons that you did leave the church. So although we really don't feel obliged to apologize for what we do, we certainly do want our critics to know and to try to understand why we do what we do. So would you explain to our viewers why you do come out publicly like you have, speaking not against the Mormons, but against the Mormon belief system? And I'd also like to say right here that, before you start, that none of us on this show are anti-Mormon. We are not anti-polygamist. We are anti-false doctrine. We don't hate polygamists. We don't hate Mormons. We love them, but we fight against false doctrine because it's leading millions down the path so far away from the truth.
Yeah.
So why are you doing it?
Why am I doing it? Well, it is a good question, and I actually have had the question asked me before. Why do I continue to bash the church, or why I can't leave it alone? And it is kind of an interesting, especially for Mormons who also do missionary work. But I've given it a little bit of thought, and I appreciate the heads up actually in thinking about this, because I made a few notes and I'd like to kind of cover them real quickly. But I don't know if the people realize that the missionary parents out there are spending $25 million a month to send out their sons and daughters to tell people in the world that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the only true church, and that it's the only way for them to get to heaven. So they don't call that bashing, I don't think. I think they call it sharing a message, and that's what we do.
That's what we do.
And so it's just kind of interesting that they would have that concept, and they go out, spread the word, so to speak. But the main reasons that I do this, one is that God's commanded it.
Yeah.
Jude 1:3, we might have a graphic on that, but Jude 1:3, I'm sorry. I exhort you that ye should earnestly contend for the faith which was once delivered unto the saints. Kind of an interesting wording there, saints.
Yeah.
But the other reason that I do it is I love the Mormon people, and I have a heart for the polygamists, those that are in polygamy. I want them to know who God is. I want them to be able to trust the Bible. I want them to realize that the temple was used to shed the blood of animals, representing eventually the shed blood of Jesus. And that was the purpose of temples. I raised my family in the church, so I've talked about that before and how difficult this has been because it's been such a traumatic kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But it's been joyful, and part of it is the excitement of learning new things. I've learned about the changes in the Book of Mormon. I've learned that Joseph Smith had 33 wives. And
you want to share all that with other people too.
And it is exciting. And that he married teenagers, and that he married women that were already married, and he did it all in the name of God.
Yeah.
So, but I've always said that that's the bad news. Finding out the problems with Mormonism is the bad news. The good news is what the gospel of Jesus Christ is all about. The Mormons believe that Jesus isn't enough.
Yeah.
That he didn't do it all for us. We have to do it ourselves. And of course, Christianity believes that he is God, and that he, through his grace and his righteousness, we can stand justified before God.
Right.
And
that he did
and
it
that
all.
we'll live with him.
Yeah.
He that believeth in me hath everlasting life. So those are the reasons I share. It's not because I have any hatred toward the Mormons,
Right.
but I've just learned these really quite exciting facts over the years, and like I say, I raised my family in the church, and I'm just excited to be able to share truth.
It's exciting
with
to
people.
know the truth, isn't it?
Yeah,
After so
it
many
is.
years of being led down the wrong path, and to find the truth. The truth is beautiful, and it's exciting, and it's wonderful.
Well, and just one last thing is that I do feel like we're blinded in Mormonism. And I didn't know that I was blind. That's
Right.
what's so interesting about 65 years in the church,
Yeah.
with what I would consider a very strong testimony, very active, and yet I was blind.
And the Bible says, or Jesus said, the blind lead the blind, and I think that does describe this culture.
That's true.
But Jesus also heals the blind.
Yeah.
And we know that because we both were blind. We both have been healed. We both can clearly see, and this culture does need to see. And anybody who wants to step out like you did and seek the truth, you will be healed from your blindness. And what's interesting too is some of the folks that now before I say this, I have to be careful, because there's a lot of people who have consigned me to the depths of hell, lower than Satan's going.
Oh yeah.
And they don't like what I'm doing, but some of them, even the people who even criticize you, like what I'm doing because I'm exposing polygamy, and that's okay with them to expose polygamy, but it's not okay for you to expose your background.
Yeah.
And yet we're both doing the same thing, so why is there a different standard?
I don't know. I felt that same way, though, when I was initially investigating and I was watching some of the programs on TV 20. It was easier to watch the polygamy program because it wasn't as threatening, I guess. It's because polygamy is part of our history.
Yeah,
We've done away with it for a while, but polygamy is still part of the LDS
It is,
culture.
and it's as difficult for the polygamists to watch our show as it was for the Mormons to watch
the other stuff.
the other part of it. So we know that we are working with very sensitive situations here, but we want everybody to know that we love them, and we want them to know the truth more than anything. And we must obey God, and God gave us the opportunity to speak, and we must speak. Ephesians chapter 5 verses 8 and 10 through 11, and this should go on the screen too, says, "For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light, and try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them." And that's what we're doing. We once were blind, and we once were in darkness, and now we can see. Now we have the light of Jesus and the truth of the Bible, and so we don't have anything to do now with what we were, but we walk in the light. And Romans 1:18, I think, is a good one. I thought I would bring up as well, where it says, "The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth." Oh. Doesn't that describe this culture?
Yeah, they don't want you to go out and learn anything.
They don't. They don't. They suppress the truth. They know they're suppressing it. The leadership of the polygamy groups, the leadership of the LDS, they know they're hiding truth. And God calls that unrighteousness.
And when there is a problem, they tend to tweak it to make it more acceptable somehow or another.
Yeah, they hide it, and then they have to cover their tracks and keep covering. And then finally in 2 Timothy chapter 2 chapter 4, verses 2 through 4 says, "Preach the word, be prepared in season and out of season, correct, rebuke, and encourage with great patience and careful instruction. For the time will come when men will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths." And so we speak what their itching ears do not want to hear, and that's the truth of the gospel truth as it's in the Bible. And we're instead of faith promoting myths like those scriptures said, we're speaking truth, and so we're criticized for it.
Well, I was always impressed. One of the things that kind of drew me out of the church was to go and just read the words of Jesus and then the words of Paul, where they didn't talk about temple work and marriage in the temple and all those different things. This is a different gospel that we're listening to here, the gospel of Joseph Smith.
That's right. So if doing this offends many people, and I'm sure that I speak for both of us on this, I'd rather offend our critics who don't like what we say than offend God by not doing what He's told us to do. And on Judgment Day, I hope there is no one that can look at me and say, "You knew. Why didn't you tell me?" Okay, let's get into what our agenda for the topic for the show is tonight. Joseph Smith and others of the early Mormon movement preached polygamy. That's what it's all about here on the show. Every one of them taught that polygamy was the way of the gods. It was the economy of heaven, they said, and it was the only way to exaltation in the celestial kingdom. Brigham Young promised damnation on those who didn't live polygamy, and today's polygamy groups do the same thing. Joseph Smith promised destruction to Emma and to others if they didn't agree to his polygamy. And you know, it's strange that these women would flock to the beds of these married men for the sake of eternal life and the promise of becoming a goddess in the coming ages, because they were told that it was okay to want to marry a married man. And all this is no different than most Mormon fundamentalists today. On this show, we have endeavored to impeach the characters of those early Mormon polygamous men, and we have used the Bible extensively to prove that God never did command or condone polygamy. And in making our case against the polygamy doctrine, we must necessarily question the reliability, the integrity, and the character of these men who preach polygamy or damnation, and every one of them have failed the biblical test. So they can't be trusted. The point being that, especially to our polygamous viewers, God doesn't want anyone to follow the commandments of men, and the Bible is clear that God didn't command polygamy, so you can walk away from it without fear, without guilt of displeasing God. So tonight we've chosen 3 events in the early history of Joseph Smith and his claims as a prophet translator that should cause doubt in any heart that seeks truth. And this information should provoke questions whether Joseph Smith could have been an honest, upright, true prophet of God. And let me remind you, it's your eternity, and each person is responsible to find out for himself the truth of what you believe. And we pray that you will search for the truth as a result of our show tonight. Jesus said in John 18, verse 37, and I quote, "For this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." So we want our viewers to stop listening to Joseph Smith and to begin listening to Jesus Christ. And the three issues we're going to discuss tonight is the Kinderhook plates. Next we'll discuss Zelph. And then we're going to talk about the Greek psalter incident if we have the time.
Okay.
So the Kinderhook plates, I don't know how many are familiar. I didn't know about them until long after I became a Christian. I didn't know anything about the Kinderhook plates.
It was well after I'd read about it in Grant Palmer's book, actually, but I hadn't ever heard of the Kinderhook plates either.
It was kind of an interesting story. A little over a year before Joseph Smith was killed, and that would be in April of 1843, in a small town near Kinderhook, Illinois. I think that's why they're called Kinderhook plates.
Right.
Some brass plates were discovered. I think 9 men were involved, and they were dug up from an Indian mound. And on those plates, there was some strange and seemingly ancient engravings. And the discovery was so intriguing that they suggested the plates be taken to Joseph Smith for translation, and that's exactly what they did. So Joseph Smith couldn't have known, of course, that these plates were nothing more than a contemporary hoax purposely manufactured to expose him as a fraud. And that's what they were. They were bogus. When Joseph saw those plates, he said they were authentic ancient records. And I'll quote what he said. They found a skeleton about 6 feet from the surface of the earth, which must have stood 9 feet high. The plates were found on the breast of the skeleton and were covered on both sides with ancient characters. I have translated a portion of them and found they contain the history of the person with whom they were found. He was a descendant of Ham through the loins of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and that he received his kingdom from the ruler of heaven and earth. So that's what Joseph Smith said were on these plates.
Did you notice the reference there, History of the Church?
It's on History of the Church, Volume 5.
Volume 5,
yeah. So they've got that in their records, that this is what Joseph Smith did. Yeah. Now, he had a private secretary. Do you want to share the quote that William Clayton? Yeah. And he was a trusted man. He was his
personal secretary.
Right.
And he said, do we have that quote? Excuse me. I have seen 6 brass plates covered with ancient characters of language containing from 30 to 40 on each side of the plates. That's President Joseph, I think is what that says, has translated a portion and says they contain the history of the person with whom they were found, and he is a descendant of Ham through the loins of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and that he received his kingdom from the ruler of heaven and earth. And that's from William Clayton's journal.
And it's also cited in Trials of Discipleship and in the History of the Church, Volume 5. So he's repeating what Joseph Smith said as being translated part of the plates and what was on them. And again, he was his scribe, Joseph Smith's private secretary and trusted scribe. So we have to trust that Joseph Smith was agreeing with what he wrote. Then there's Parley P. Pratt. In a letter to a friend on May 7th of 1843, this is what he said. 6 plates having the appearance of brass have lately been dug out of a mound by a gentleman in Pike County, Illinois. They are small and filled with engravings in Egyptian language and contain the genealogy of one of the ancient Jaredites back to the Ham, the son of Noah. A large number of citizens have seen them and compared the characters with those on the Egyptian papyrus, which is now in the city. So we've quoted 3 people
who must have heard the same story.
All heard the same, and they're all supposedly reliable people. As far as Joseph Smith is concerned, and as far as the organized church at the time was concerned. Now, later information came forward, however, that these plates were forgeries, that they were purposely manufactured to test and expose Joseph Smith as a false translator of ancient languages. We have one of the plates there on the screen. And I don't know if that's the one that was found later. It might be.
I think there's
probably
one in the Chicago Historical Society. Those are Those are the front and back of the six Kinderhook plates. And number 5, I think, is the one that's in the Chicago Historical Society.
Right. On April 25th of 1856, several years later, do you want to share? W.P. Harris wrote a letter where he admitted that the plates were not genuine plates.
And the reason this didn't come up until 1855, they were actually hoping and waiting for Joseph Smith to translate these into a book, like he had done the Book of Abraham, is what I've read. And Joseph, of course, was martyred within a year after all this, so he wasn't able to do that. But this quote from W.P. Harris, we should have that.
It should be on the screen.
I was present with a number at or near Kinderhook and helped to dig. Oh, wrong one. I'm sorry.
There it is.
I was present with a number at or near Kinderhook and helped to dig at the time the plates were found. I made an honest affidavit to the same. Since that time, Bridge Whitten said to me that he cut and prepared the plates and that he and R. Willie engraved them themselves. Wilburn Fugit appeared to be the chief with R. Willie and B. Whitten.
And so he's admitting there were 3 people involved with setting Joseph Smith up with the false.
That's right.
With these false things. And on June 30th, 1879, W. Fugit, he wrote a letter admitting his part in the fraud. He said, I received your letter in regard to those plates and will say in answer that they are a humbug gotten up by Robert Wiley, Bridge Whitten, and myself. We read in Pratt's prophecy that truth is yet to spring out of the earth. We concluded to prove the prophecy by way of a joke.
That's funny, isn't it?
Well, and the joke is on Joseph Smith.
Yeah, he was such a character for being able to look at something and just automatically, spontaneously come to some grand conclusions. It always seemed like it was through the pharaohs or something, but it was always Egyptian characters or something.
And yet the Egyptologists, you know, there is no such language as what they've done. And now the Kinderhook plates were lost during the Civil War, and many years later, decades later, former professor of BYU, M. Wilford Polson, who was a student of early Mormon history, found one of the original Kinderhook plates. That's plate number 5 that you were talking about in the Chicago Historical Society Museum. And the plate that Polson found has been identified as plate number 5, and except for an acid blotch on it, one side is in excellent condition. And after a lot of research, Polson was convinced that it was a forgery. But the BYU president of BYU Archaeological Society was convinced that it was genuine. So a few years later, an LDS physicist named George Lawrence was given permission to make some non-destructive physical studies of the surviving plate. And after the examination, he wrote, the dimensions, tolerances, composition, and workmanship are consistent with the facilities of an 1843 blacksmith shop and with the fraud stories of the original participants. Now, his tests were non-destructive, and that wasn't good enough. They wanted some destructive, some more solid testing done, and so they got permission to do that. The Ensign, do you have that written? Because you could read the Ensign article where it reports what happened.
It says, a recent electronic and chemical analysis of a metal plate brought in 1843 to the prophet Joseph Smith appears to solve a previously unanswered question in church history, helping to further evidence that the plate is what its producers later said it was, a 19th century attempt to lure Joseph Smith into making a translation of ancient-looking characters that had been etched into the plates. As a result of these tests, we conclude that the plate is not of ancient origin.
But he said they were.
And he said he was translating them.
And he translated part of them by saying who the person was and where, how, even his genealogy of who he was. Now, there's scores of people who are watching this and will watch the show in the future who's going to refuse to face the facts, and they're going to scramble to make excuses for Joseph Smith, even though there's more than enough evidence to convict him of false translations. And some folks say that he knew they were a fraud and that he didn't fall for their trickery, and that he never translated the plates, just like you just said.
Yeah.
And then there's others who say that if he hadn't been killed, he would have had a full translation, just like you already said. But Joseph Smith, William Clayton Parley P. Pratt both said that Smith had begun to translate the plates, and we repeat what Joseph Smith's private and trusted secretary said. He said, Smith has translated a portion and says they contain the history of the person with whom they were found, and he was a descendant of Ham through the loins of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and that he received his kingdom from the ruler of heaven and earth. Then the Nauvoo neighbor. Do you have that quote of what they said?
So the contents of the plates, together with a facsimile of the same, will be published in the Times and Seasons as soon as the translation is completed, and that was in 1843.
And that backs up what you said.
Like he's going to translate
like the Book of Abraham.
Yeah, just the same way. And
so
that would have been interesting if he'd have been able to complete that.
Well, and the Book of Abraham, of course, we know isn't a translation. That's already been proven to be a fraud, just like this is. So we have the Book of Abraham is not a translation. There's not a shred of evidence that the Book of Mormon is a translation. And we discovered that the Kinderhook plates were manufactured locally and at the same time period of Joseph Smith himself, and they succeeded to establish that Smith couldn't and did not translate any documents from any ancient records. And finally, did you have something to say?
Well, just to interrupt, the Dead Sea Scrolls also prove that Joseph Smith's translation of the Bible has absolutely no basis in fact.
That's right.
There's not one of his changes that were made that's supported by the Dead Sea Scrolls.
That's exactly right.
And that was before the plain and precious things were taken out, presumably.
Presumably, exactly. And so the final quote on the Kinderhook plates is by critical author Charles A. Shook, and he said, "Only a bogus prophet translates bogus plates." Okay, now we're going to talk about Zelph. What is a Zelph?
Who is a Zelph?
Who or what is a Zelph? Well, Joseph Smith wrote in his journal on June 3rd of 1834 that during his travels he visited several mounds of ancient inhabitants in the country near the Illinois River, and he found a high mound where they dug to about a foot below the surface of the ground and discovered a skeleton of a man with a stone, kind of an arrow, an old arrow, Lamanitish arrow, he said, stuck between the ribs of the skeleton. And then Joseph Smith said that they all had some kind of a peculiar sensation in their bosoms, and subsequently visions of the past were open to his understanding, and he discovered who this skeleton was. We'll let Earl tell you.
Joseph said that this is a white Lamanite, a large, thick-set man, and a man of God, and his name was Zelph. He was a warrior and a chieftain who was known from the hill Cumorah, or eastern sea, to the Rocky Mountains. The curse was taken from Zelph, or at least in part. One of his thigh bones was broken by a stone thrown from a sling while in battle, years before his death. He was killed in battle by the arrow found in his ribs during the last great struggle of the Lamanites and Nephites. And that's in the documentary history of the church.
Yeah. And according to the Times and Seasons publication, Brigham Young took the arrowhead, and then there were others who carried off the leg and thigh bones of the skeleton and for souvenirs. And I believe we have a picture of the skeleton there that they've put together. And this information is in History of the Church, as well as Kimball's Journal and Times and Seasons. So you can see that this has all really happened. It's not stuff we're sitting here making up just to discredit Joseph Smith. No. This stuff really happened. But the amazing thing about of this story of Zelph is not necessarily this creature that he called Zelph, but the lack of archaeological evidence of the hill Cumorah, of where it is in Mormonism. The scholars don't even agree on its location now because there's no evidence for the Book of Mormon. But Joseph Smith identified in this story of Zelph where the hill Cumorah is, and he said it's between the Eastern Sea and the Rocky Mountains, and hill Cumorah is in New York.
He said that's where the last great battle took place. So.
That's right. Is there any evidence of that battle?
No. No.
No great or small battle, or no evidence whatsoever
no battle.
of
no
the battle.
No swords or chariots or anything else.
Yeah, Joseph Smith said that Zelph was killed during the last and great struggle of the Lamanites and the Nephites. And Mormon, in the Book of Mormon, chapter 6, tells us that the final battle was at Hill Cumorah.
So,
and that's in New York.
Unless that was a couple of 100-mile event.
So why don't they put in the Book of Mormon, why don't they put pictures of where the Hill Cumorah is, like the Bible puts pictures where their things are?
They don't know for sure. For that.
they can't say. Now Palmyra is 250 miles from Kirtland.
Okay.
How could Zelph be killed in Illinois and be part of that last final battle that took place
at the Hill Cumorah?
At the Hill Cumorah. Did he walk there after he was shot or killed with the arrow? I mean,
I don't know. Either that or there's another Hill Cumorah, a second Hill Cumorah. But, you know, it's interesting when Joseph Smith sent missionaries to the Lamanites, he sent them to Ohio, Illinois, Missouri, those places out west. So he definitely believed that the American Indians were the Nephites and Lamanites of the day. Which has, of course, been proven not to be true. So.
That's exactly right. Well, you know, the geographical problems, I mean, Zelph couldn't have walked there if he was killed in the battle.
There'd been no reason to carry him anywhere.
And no one survived.
Yeah.
Isn't that what it says?
None of the Nephites.
None survived the battle. Yeah. And then finally, with Joseph Smith, the identification of Zelph being a white Lamanite witnesses that Joseph Smith was a racist. He said he was white because the curse had been broken, at least in part. That's what Joseph Smith said, which of course is the curse of dark skin, confirming the Book of Mormon, teaching that dark skin is a result of unrighteousness, and they will turn white with righteousness. 3rd Nephi chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. Do you want to do that one?
Sure. And it came to pass that those Lamanites who had united with the Nephites were numbered among the Nephites, and their curse was taken from them, and their skin became white like unto the Nephites. That happened back and forth during the Book of Mormon days.
Yeah, it's all over in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
The white is righteousness, and dark skin is wickedness. And Zelph was and Joseph Smith said that when he identified Zelph.
Yeah.
So and there's no excuse that Joseph Smith was a product of a racist environment. And that's not acceptable at all, because God's men are on the side of truth.
Yeah.
And God never cursed Cain or the Lamanites or anyone with dark skin. That's ridiculous. Okay, so that is the Kinderhook plates and Zelph. We're about halfway through the show. We're about ready to open up the phone lines. We've got more to go, but we'd like to invite our viewers to call in and make your comments or ask your questions if you'd like to share in the program. Our phone number is 801-973-TV20, 801-973-8820, and while we're waiting for the calls to come in, we do have our message to share with you.
Polygamy, What Love Is This? Broadcasting live from Salt Lake City, Utah. This program is the broadcast outreach of a Shield and Refuge ministry. Shield and Refuge is a point of first contact for Mormon fundamentalists who question the doctrines of the religion or who are actively seeking for an opportunity to escape the polygamist lifestyle. Examining the claims of fundamentalist doctrine against the backdrop of biblical truth is central to our efforts. We invite you to contact us. Call toll-free at 877-425-9993 or email us at tv@aboutpolygamy.com. We want you to know that we've made available to you some outstanding resources free of charge. You will find them at our website, www.whatloveisthis.tv. There you will find the DVD, Lifting the Veil of Polygamy, which documents the real-life stories told firsthand of those who were lifted out of the culture of polygamy through the power and love of Jesus Christ. Also, free of charge to you is the booklet, Is Polygamy Biblical? It explores plural marriage in the context of God's Word and answers questions like, did God ever command polygamy? Is it part of God's plan? While you are at our website, make sure to take advantage of the archived episodes of this program, which can stream on demand directly to your computer. There are more than 100 shows to choose from. And if someone you know is unable to view this program via live broadcast, recommend that they visit this same website every Thursday at 8 p.m. Mountain Time to watch this show through live streaming video. Simply follow the links to the live streaming video page. If you are watching live tonight, we invite you to call us as we open our phone lines. The number is 801-973-TV20. That's 801-973-8820. Now, back to Polygamy, What Love Is This? With our host, Doris Hanson.
Welcome back to our show, Polygamy, What Love Is This? I'm your host, Doris Hanson. The co-host, Bishop Earl Erskine, is here, and we're sharing some of the interesting on-the-spot revelations that Joseph Smith had in his early days, and of course proving that they were spurious and that he actually really could not translate ancient documents. We did the Kinderhook plays, talked about them, and they were proven to be a hoax. Yeah. And then, of course, we just got through talking about Zelph the Lamanite and how he got killed in the final great battle 260 miles away from the battle. We have more to go, but we have an off-the-air question right now for Earl. Not sure what this question is.
Yeah, the question is, what is temple oath disowning apostates? And I'm not sure exactly what they're trying to say. There are oaths in the temple about revealing the goings-on of the temple and that there'd be judgment and punishment for that. I don't know of an oath disowning apostates, so I'm not sure exactly if maybe someone could call, or a person could call back and clarify the question.
Okay. And I also would like to mention that last week we had a pre-recorded interview for the show of two girls that had escaped from the Kingston Polygamy Group a while back. And of course, because it was pre-recorded, we could not take phone calls. If anybody has watched the show and have comments or questions that you would like to call in tonight and ask about, certainly feel free to, or email. If I can't answer the question, then I can take it to one of the ladies that was interviewed. And if you haven't seen that interview, you need to. You can go on our website, whatloveisthis.tv, and click on June 13th show. And it'll break your heart, but you need to hear it. So give us a call if you have any questions, or of course you can always email us. Now, another on-the-spot spurious identification of ancient history took place on the north bank of the Grand River in Davies, I guess you say it, County, yeah, Missouri. After coming across some ruins, Joseph Smith said, quote, "This is the valley of God in which Adam blessed his children, and upon this very altar Adam himself offered up sacrifices to Jehovah. This place is Tower Hill, and at its feet we will lay out a city which shall be called Adam-ondi-Ammon. Here Adam, the Ancient of Days, shall come to visit his people. He shall sit on a throne of fiery flame, as predicted by Daniel the prophet, with thousands ministering unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 standing before him." This is history of the church and Doctrine and Covenants. A brief history of the church is all documented very well. So, Adam lived in Missouri? I don't think so. The Bible is very clear where the Garden of Eden was, identified by two rivers.
The Tigris and Euphrates
and the
River.
Euphrates River.
Right.
And by the way, I thought I would do some checking. And Joseph Smith's translation, don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but this is where he decided he would retranslate the Bible to suit himself. And in that, in Genesis chapter 1, where it talks about the Garden of Eden, he has identified where Adam lived. And Adam lived in a place where there was the Euphrates River and the Tigris River, and he even mentioned Ethiopia. Okay? Wow. Now that's in Joseph Smith's translation. So how could it be in Missouri?
Good question.
And Adam's not the Ancient of Days. Joseph Smith and Brigham Young both taught that he was, but it's God who is the Ancient of Days, and that goes in with Brigham Young's teaching that Adam was God.
Probably added to that theory, or his concept that Adam was God. Yeah.
Right, and Daniel never did prophesy that Adam was going to sit on a fiery throne, so Joseph Smith lied. Again, proving that he was a false prophet, like his mother confirmed that he could tell tall tales. One of his linguistic bouffas is illustrated in the story of the Greek psalter. We're going to let Earl tell you the story of the Greek psalter.
Oh, Well, this was a book of Psalms that a Henry Caswell, Episcopal minister, brought to Joseph Smith. Now, he knew that this was Greek, and he knew what it said. And he said to Joseph, he handed the book, well, I think I have a quote, or we have a quote up here. I handed the book to the prophet and begged him to explain its contents. He asked me if I had any idea of its meaning. I replied that I believed it to be a Greek psalter, which again is the book of Psalms from the Bible, but that I should like to hear his opinion. No, he said, it ain't Greek at all, except perhaps a few words. What ain't Greek is Egyptian, and what ain't Egyptian is Greek. This book is very valuable. It's a dictionary of Egyptian hieroglyphics. And do we have the, pointing to the capital letters at the commencement of each verse, he said, them figures is Egyptian hieroglyphics, and them which follows is the interpretation of the hieroglyphics written in the Reformed Egyptian. Those characters is like the letters that was engraved on the golden plates. Well, this gentleman, apparently prophet, left the room. Caswell turned triumphantly to the men present, and this included Willard Richards, and exposed the trick, and they appeared confounded for a while, he wrote, but at length Willard Richards said, sometimes Mr. Smith speaks as a prophet, sometimes as a mere man. If he gave a wrong opinion respecting the book, he spoke as a mere man, which is awfully convenient, I guess.
It is awfully convenient,
Yeah.
but he's supposed to be speaking as a prophet, we understand, and these incidents speak for themselves, I think.
Well, they do, because Joseph had this, I mean, he'd done the same thing with the book of Abraham. He said that he translated it, and so anytime they were finding these things and people were wanting to trick him, which they did very successfully, that he would, and he would jump right on it and come up with these spontaneous explanations of what things were without really knowing what the truth was.
And what's interesting about false prophets is time is their enemy. Time is the enemy of every false prophet, because time marches on and will prove them to be a false prophet, and that's what's happened with the book of Abraham. We've discovered that papyrus. We've discovered the Kinderhook plates were fake. We know that Adam was not in Missouri. All of those things, you know, it's just absolutely true. So these incidents speak for themselves, and in agreement with Grant Palmer, we want to end this discussion with one of his quotes, and this is what he said. There is a difference between an isolated incident and a pattern. The Greek Psalter, the Book of Abraham, the Kinderhook plates, and some would add the Book of Mormon, DNA evidence, anachronisms, lack of archaeological, anthropological, cultural, linguistic, and metallurgical evidence to support claims reveal a disturbing pattern in Joseph Smith's methods and perhaps his character. The testimony of his mother about his ability to spontaneously make up stories about ancient inhabitants of the Americas, and the story he made up about Zelph, the white Lamanite, while on the Zion's camp march to Missouri, are consistent with this pattern. He seemed unable to resist the opportunity to appear as an expert, whether he was qualified to offer expert analysis or not. This pattern of deception can also be seen in his tendency to use prevarication to cover up his polygamous activities. It raises serious questions in those who are fair-minded and objective about Joseph Smith's believability and credibility. And we do add a solemn amen to Palmer's conclusions. And again, we urge those who are following Joseph Smith's command to practice polygamy. You do not need to fear to displease God by walking away from it. You can do that because polygamy is not from God, it's from Joseph Smith. And any man who makes the claims that Joseph Smith made, they all need to be proven, they've all been proven false, and they don't need to be recognized as a spiritual leader, a prophet, or a revelator. So give us a call if you're interested. We will do everything that we can to help you. We do have a bibliography of where we got this information. If you want to check it out, we urge you to check it out. The facsimiles of the plates that we showed are in the History of the Church, Volume 5. We got some of our information from MormonThink.com, UTLM.org, MRM.org, 20 Truths Info, Mormon Kinderhook, and rfmorg.wordpress.com, and so on. So you can find the information there. Our phone lines are open. We'd be happy to take some telephone calls. Looks like we've got some calls waiting. Okay. Question off the air. One family home evening lesson teaches about honesty. how can the church teach honesty when it's all built on lies?
You know, it is tough, and you were mentioning time is really against a false prophet, and changes. It just seemed like Joseph Smith, he probably was unaware that he had said those things in his Joseph Smith translation when he found the skeleton of Zelph, and had really not able to coordinate those two things. So that's the problem with not telling the truth. You have to remember what you said.
Right, so you have to cover up and cover up, and there have been decades and
a lot of that.
A lot of years of cover up. Okay, Mike from Cottonwood is calling. Hello, Mike.
Yes, this is Mike.
Okay, Mike, you're on the air. What's your question?
Yes, I heard about 10 minutes ago that Bishop Earl, he said that he made the comment that Joseph Smith was martyred. I know Jesus was martyred, and historians constantly agree with Bishop Earl and say that Joseph Smith was martyred, and I understood he was killed in a gunfight.
It was a gun battle, all right. Yeah, well, actually, the Mormons have martyred him, made him into a martyr. He really wasn't martyred.
Do the polygamists believe he was martyred?
Oh, of course. They hold him in higher esteem than the Mormons.
That's just my 64 years in Mormonism that comes out there. I mean, he did shoot, so it was somewhat of a gun battle, but it's always considered that he and Hiram were martyred.
Yeah.
That's why I use that phrase.
Yeah.
That's not really martyrdom, is that correct?
He wasn't really martyred. It wasn't really truly a martyrdom, no. He was killed. He didn't go as a lamb to slaughter like they claim he was. It was a gun battle, and no one's saying that he shouldn't have defended himself. That's okay. But let's tell the truth about how it happened rather than turning it into something it wasn't.
Yeah.
So the historians really, they don't get it, right?
No, they don't get it. But most of them know that they are covering up, and that's the sad part about it. They just need to be telling the truth.
Yeah, okay. Hey, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Doing a great job. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night. Okay, we have Brian calling from Bountiful. Hello, Brian.
Yes, I was just wondering if the dark-skinned people are punished for what they did. Why doesn't God still do that? It doesn't make sense. Why doesn't God still punish people by giving them dark skin?
That is a good question. Every time somebody's convicted of a crime, their skin doesn't turn color.
No, that only happened to the Lamanites and the Nephites, I guess. It was kind of a tricky thing there.
That's an awesome question.
Yeah,
Thank you
good.
for calling.
Welcome. Thanks.
Bye. Give us something to think about fresh there. Okay, Carolyn is calling from Parowan. Hello, Carolyn? Carolyn, you need to turn your volume down.
Hello?
Carolyn? Carolyn?
Hello?
Turn your volume down, please.
Okay, it's down.
Okay, you're on the air. You're on the
Hello?
air. Carolyn, you're on the air. Would you ask your question, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. I left Mormonism, and my family considers me an apostate, and they cannot have anything to do with me because they told me they took an oath in the temple, and if they did associate with me, that they would be in jeopardy is not to go back to the temple, or they could lose their membership. And I'm wondering, what do they say in the temple about that?
Carolyn, it's not that. It's the question that you're asked to get your temple recommend. It asks you if you support or affiliate with any groups who are apostate. I actually could say the words if I had a moment. But from the actual question for your temple recommend interview, and the question then is, if they affiliate with you, then they can't answer that question honestly. And what's kind of interesting is that there have been some gay situations, and I won't get into all that, but just where people have good friends who are gay, and they have trouble answering that question as well. Do you associate or affiliate or support any groups who don't practice doctrines approved by the church, something like that. And so, of course, a gay person is an active gay person.
Jesus would never make it in the temple.
He wouldn't make it into the temple, no, because he does affiliate with people who don't practice.
He fraternized with prostitutes and with drunkards and with and all kinds of sinners.
So, Carolyn, it isn't in the temple, I don't believe, is where that question's coming from. It's or their concept. It's from the temple recommend question. And I think any bishop, I think anyone would tell them that doesn't apply, and that you should show love to your family for sure, and to all men really. But and they're not supporting you necessarily. They're not affiliating with you other than being family. So I don't know. That may be more difficult than the question, but that's where it's coming from, I think.
Well, Carolyn, we're sorry to hear that.
Are they threatened about losing their membership, or?
Well, just that they would have trouble.
We can't go to the temple anymore if we associate with you. So.
Well, that's what they're trying to have to answer that question. If they're affiliating with you, can they answer that to the bishop? And I mean, if they love you, and I mean, I don't know your relationship, but
they won't even talk to me. It's total abandonment, which is okay because now I have Christ.
Good
so
for you.
I just think that is just so odd that they would be threatened so heavily, in that organization, that they would kick a mother, a grandmother, an aunt, a sister, out of the family entirely. You can't even talk to us. You can't see the kids. You're done.
Well, one of the real problems with Mormonism is that they tell you what to wear, how much you have to pay to get to heaven, what you can eat, what you can drink, what you can read, what you shouldn't read.
I was a Mormon for 60 years.
Yeah, and in this case, they're telling you. They're telling you.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you for calling, Carolyn.
And they tell you who in your family you can affiliate with. That's pretty sad.
It is sad, and
they don't have any more confidence in their truth. The church just has a hard time standing up to scrutiny.
I would like somebody to give me some Bible verses that backs up and supports their decision to do this kind of thing. In fact, the opposite is true. If you look through and study just the Gospels, just where Jesus was walking the earth, and study what he taught, there is no way that he would ever condone that kind of treatment.
Well, it became so clear to me, and I have to admit, I was blind and deceived for 64 years, but once it started opening up, it crumbled quickly, and I could really feel like I could understand and see the truth and the true gospel and who God is and the love he has for all of us. It's just sad to see my family and other friends and family that are still in bondage, and the polygamists are. It's even another level of.
It is another level totally, and they are. Some of the polygamy groups are worse. If you can get worse than that, they are worse. They just. In the interview that we did last week, one of the girls said that they tell their family, their brothers and sisters, their siblings, they cannot contact them. They cannot talk to them. You will lose your siblings forever, and then some of them will even place blame on the siblings if they leave. Warren Jeffs placed blame on the parents if the children went wrong, and he said that if the children go wrong, then the parents will not be exalted. It's their fault that the children do wrong, and of course that's placing the guilt. That's just intertwining that into that spider's web, and it's just ugly, and it isn't from God. None of it is.
My yoke is easy, my burden is light.
Yeah. And I just had come across this. I thought I'd quickly say. They ask why we do what we do. This is one reason. We want them to know the truth. But in Colossians 3:9 it says, "Don't lie to each other." Well, we just talked about the lies and the deceit that the church itself, the polygamy groups are just as guilty. Ephesians 4:25, "Therefore each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully." So speak truthfully, you leaders of the Mormon church and the polygamy groups. Tell the truth. Proverbs 30 verse 8, "Keep falsehoods and lies far from me." Psalm 119, "I hate and abhor falsehood." Proverbs 13:5, "The righteous hate what is false." Psalm 101, "No one who practices deceit shall dwell in God's house." And Psalm 119:30, "I have chosen the way of truth." So I think all that kind of fits into what we've been talking about.
Well, I think it's so interesting that in the last 30, 40 years, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the papyrus being found, even these tests on this Greek psalter or the Kinderhook plates and all these things, it's almost like God's saying, you know, I'm trying to give you, I don't want to slap you in the face and really, but I'm giving you all this information. I'm trying to share with you. They even found Joseph's handwritten version of the first vision where he said he only saw one person and he didn't have the Satan experience and all that. It's just kind of like I'm God saying, I'm trying to give you this information if you'll just look.
If you'll just listen, if you'll just look.
Yeah.
And he said in 1 Thessalonians 5:21, test everything and hold on to the good.
Yeah.
And in Acts 17:11, where Paul said the Bereans were noble people. This is what God thinks is noble. Search the scriptures daily to make sure these things are true. And when he said scriptures, he meant the Bible. That's the only true scriptures. Search the Bible daily to see if what you're being taught is true. And if you don't do that, you're disobeying God. And again, it's your eternity. You're the one that has to answer to God on the day of judgment of why you followed a false prophet and didn't trust Jesus.
Yeah, and hypocrites, that always struck me so much in the Bible. Jesus was such against hypocrites, and as I started learning these new things, I felt like I really couldn't sit there and be a hypocrite anymore.
Sit under the hypocritical teachings
no one
anymore.
thing and say another. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, well, that's our show for tonight. We had a little bit more to share, but we can do that on another night. So my closing comments, are you going to follow someone who got it wrong all the time, or will you choose to follow Jesus who got it right 100% of the time? You know, it's amazing with such shameful evidence as we've talked about tonight of Joseph Smith's deceptions that hasn't completely destroyed trust in his claims. But sadly, most people who embrace Joseph Smith have no idea of the evidence that proves he was a fraud. And amazing that those who do know about them will bury their head in the sand and pretend it isn't true. Since Joseph Smith is a proven false prophet, we can know that polygamy is also a false doctrine. That means that all polygamists can fearlessly walk away from Joseph Smith and his doctrine of polygamy and seek the truth in Jesus Christ alone. When Jesus first began calling his disciples, he called Nathanael in John 1:47, and he said of him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no guile." Well, guile means trickery. We cannot say that about Joseph Smith. He lied, he cheated, he was an adulterer, and yet this culture holds him in higher esteem than Jesus Christ sometimes. The trouble remains that there is so much guile about Joseph Smith that his followers don't know about and will probably never know unless they have enough integrity and want to know the truth. But most people will continue in their blissful ignorance because they've been taught, even threatened, to embrace blind obedience rather than reasonable, historical, and biblical facts. And one fact is, the road to eternal life is narrow and few will find it. Are you looking for it? Jesus said, "I am the way." So you need to seek Him and let everything else go. Good night.